I talk in sports code a lot, and I promise it's not some shtick. It's really part of my philosophy, and the world that I'm from in athletics is really not that different from any external organization. So, let's talk about it. Welcome to Outsider Information. I am your host, Brandon, and your strategic partner here with OIAS. As always, if anything resonates, give a like, subscribe, engage, not just here, but some social media. There are rumors that there might be a new one that popped up in the last week or so. Also, check out the website. Website's cool. Drink of the episode is a spiced black tea, homemade blend. Still working on what to call it, but it is bold, it is robust, it is nice when it hits the palate. All right, jumping in. The intro, right? Bridging that world between athletics and business. So the original purpose of this whole space before it became Versify, it was called the Arena in the Boardroom, and it was designed to be a athletic space that bridges the world of sports and business. Now that evolved over time to get a little bit more reach, to be a little bit more relatable, but that also did spawn into what was my doctoral research, which really explored the lens of organizations through the template of an NFL organization. So how are sports and external business really that different? They really aren't, right? At least in my opinion, they're not. You look at all the different components, right, of how people are working together to achieve a common goal. It's very sports centric. It's just not thought about that way. And the primary reason I would say it's not different is because of one thing: people, right? People make up teams, people make up organizations, people make up society. And without people, nothing really exists. And that is the way that the two are almost identical. And you could probably draw that parallel to anything. Now, I'm going to double down and say that sports really set the framework for how organizations could function. And I want you to think about how. Youth sports, it's about growth, exposure. You're developing not really skills, but you're developing people. When you get into sports, right, that teenage range, teamwork, discipline, the hard truths that not everything is going to result in a win. You get to college sports, you're doing agency, refinement, the clarity of what this all means. And then you have, if you're fortunate enough to get to the pro level, drive, competition, legacy. The thing that differs is how we find our people, right? That's the differentiator between external organizations and sports, is how we find our people. The big adjustment that I had coming out of an athletic space to more of a conventional external space was how cavalier organizations are towards people, not really in the treatment, but just the process and how they acquire them. It's not a deliberate process. In my world in athletics, and the world that exists for many who are in sports, from pros to college, high school, club, the players are the determiner of our success. They are really the determining factor. You can have the best coach in the world, but if the team is not well built, it doesn't matter, right? And flip that, if you've got a collection of really good players, they could probably still be a little bit successful without a coach, right? Because ultimately the talent is going to take over and do what it does. Bad rosters, bad players, bad chemistry, ultimately bad performance, that gets coaches and general managers, really anyone involved in the team selection process, that'll get us fired. And externally, notice in an organization how it's the bad people that always remain. I joke that there's no merit in hard work. Hard work is going to earn you burnout. But when you think about who's really in charge and how long they've been there, it's not because they're necessarily great. It's just because they outlasted everybody else. And because of that, they know the system, they're there, and it puts an artificial ceiling in place. I was asked in an interview once what talent acquisition teams get wrong. And my response was, you guys really don't know how to evaluate. Now, shocker, I didn't end up getting that job, but it is the truth, right? Organizations oftentimes get caught flat-footed because they don't have a plan, not necessarily for who they're going to hire, but how they're going to hire them and how it's going to make sense and what that's going to look like 3 months from now, 6 months from now. If this person's still around a year from now, what is their place in the organization? How does that interfere or enhance the dynamic that you already have? Okay, that is what talent acquisition teams routinely get wrong, is they don't evaluate the entire person, right? They evaluate the things that they like. It's very feelings, it's very vibes based, and people get canceled out for a lot of those reasons. Forget skill, forget aptitude. If they don't like you, you don't have a job. And that is how a lot of hiring takes place, regardless of if they say otherwise. Okay. Broad overview of the research that I did. NFL teams set the template of how we want to do this. So what I mean by that is, my argument was, if you structured your hiring team like an NFL's personnel department, you would have a lot more success, right? They have a separate entity that functions to just evaluate personnel, and then the decisions are made by the general manager and the coaches. The turnover in the NFL on an annual basis, so teams turn over roughly 60% of their players on an annual basis. That's rounding up. And the U.S. average is around, it's in the mid-40s, right? So that is about a 15% gap in how much turnover exists. My argument was, if an NFL team with its highly limited pool, and they have about 300 draft eligible players come out each year, and you're just kind of recycling players in the ecosystem to basically build a 53-man roster, if they can do that on a year-to-year basis and not get flat-footed, that organizations who use this model with a vastly larger pool of people, and we're talking millions of people, should never be in the same position. And it's done by being active in your personnel approach, not reactive, which most organizations are. All right. In an external organization, HR is doing the sourcing and the initial interviews. And it's problematic, again, because what I said earlier about evaluation, it also gatekeeps that process. I understand why. Managers are very busy people, and they don't have the time to actively look for people. So they've got that part right. It's just the execution of it is pretty bootleg. A lot of times it's in real time, and it's about filling a need. And I've argued this before as well. If you are doing anything exclusively based off of need, you are setting yourself up for failure, because you're going to make, at times, potentially desperate decisions because you have to get something done. It's not a good practice. It's not healthy for an organization. And again, a lot of stuff slips through the cracks. A manager tells you, we need somebody to be on the floor or in the position in the next couple of weeks. Well, one of the processes that's wrong with hiring is just really honestly how quick it is, right? And I'm saying this in terms of how you don't get to know somebody. Dragging an interview process out for 6 weeks and having 8 different interviews is also not the way. I also did a podcast episode of how you could knock this out in 2 weeks and get sufficient information to make a decision. But again, the process a lot of the times is rushed. It's really feelings based. We like this person. We think they'll fit. Regardless of the other pieces of the picture that would give you a lot of key indicators for success. There is a holistic element to what we do in athletics that really help us evaluate the people in addition to the player. Now, it's not 100%, but it's a process that really does allow you to craft the philosophy and identity of your team, right? The other thing that happens a lot in external organizations is there's no consequences for high turnover. If you as an organization are turning over 40% of your people, well, to me, that tells me that there's a glitch in hiring, and that person who is doing the selecting or the sourcing probably has to go, right? Managers set the template, but they don't see that template come to fruition until the end. They are told some generalities, you're going to like this person, and that also creates a problem too, because they are not actively part of the process. As a coach, I was recruiting my players, or if I got a recommendation from a player, I then started to do the legwork. I had an ability to see this thing from start to end, and that allowed me to paint a picture to really understand the player. If I didn't like the player, but they were really good and they were going to be good for the team, doesn't really factor in, right? You are trying to win games. You're trying to do the thing that is going to help you keep your job, which is building a good team. You don't have to love everybody. You have to be able to work with them. And that, again, is where the shortcoming comes inside of external organizations. Going to sports, okay? We build our teams years out. And I get that that's not practical in an external organization, but you can actively build for the future with pipelines. When we are looking at our team, right? And I'll use high school as the example. You've got freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors. If you have too much of one, it's going to end up being a problem at some point. You've got to have layers with how you build your team out. You have to know what's coming up the pipeline, right? If I've got 7 seniors and I've got thin numbers everywhere else, we'll say it's a team of 12. We'll say 7 seniors, I've got 2 juniors, I've got 2 sophomores and a freshman on a roster, so 12 players. Those 7 seniors are going to graduate, and then I've got to fill 7 spots again. That top-heavy kind of a roster doesn't work in a whole lot of circumstances and situations where you're going to have frequent turnover of your players because it doesn't allow for any continuity. You would probably, in a lot of ways, unless you are going to win a championship that year, then in that case, sell the farm. You want to have layers, right? Maybe that number of 7 comes down to 4 or 5, and it allows you to maybe have another freshman. It allows you to have somebody else who's not going to exit the program within a year or two so that you can kind of build that whole thing up. When you're looking at that, you're looking at your 7th and 8th graders, who's going to be potentially coming up. How can you develop them? There is a process to knowing what is available so that you can actually have a functional team down the road. It's a painful process, especially when you're taking over a rebuild, because a lot of times you got to cut a lot of players just to focus on the long-term health of the program. And the players, the parents don't care about that. But as a coach, as a GM, your focus is not just to win now, it's to make sure you can keep winning so that you stay employed. True recruitment, organizations don't take part in, right? Recruiting is relationship building. Organizations have a bunch of people who are glorified screeners and doing interviews and then sending emails to those who they do and don't want. When you are recruiting a player, you are learning everything, right? You are meeting the parents. You are meeting, in some cases, siblings. You're showing up to tournaments, at least in volleyball. You're doing that. You're interacting with club coaches, high school coaches. I talked to some principals. I DM'd a couple of players' friends on social media because you're trying to get every piece of information you can in order to understand how this person is going to fit within your framework. Because that decision, if you are giving out scholarships, if you're giving out a roster spot, there's a finite number of those. You can only manage so many players. If you don't make the right decision, it can completely torpedo your team. I have made bad roster decisions, as have a lot of other coaches. The implications are very high, again, because it can completely crater your team. We build our teams with the thought of protecting the team, protecting the locker room, because nothing will sail your season quicker than team drama. And again, that is the difference between what we do and what organizations do. It's feelings based of whether or not you like them. But what about everything else? The other factors, the other contributors that are going to go in. If you're looking at it from the surface level, that's why a lot of bad hires get made. It's a balance between winning now and making sure we have a future. Again, going back to the first example of how we try to layer our teams. Because, again, if it sucks, the people who built the team, they are going to be fired, and rightfully so. We, as coaches and as talent evaluators, put a premium on the selection of our rosters because that's the only way that we survive in the worlds that we do. All right? Okay, how do we bridge the two? Under the current structure that exists, you need to hire true talent evaluators for your TA teams. And the people who know people are the people who work with people. Think a social scientist, someone who's got a social or psych background, someone who maybe spent some time as a profile, worked in criminal justice. Those are the people you probably want evaluating people because TA is not an entry-level job. It's one of the most important ones. And when I see people talk about, well, if you want to get into HR, go into talent acquisition, that's a terrible message. That is not an easy job. And again, if you're just screening resumes, great. But if you're responsible for making personnel decisions or guiding personnel decisions, you want trusted individuals who know how to function and evaluate around people. That is just fact. And we see that problem and that glitch in a lot of areas. You want to have a true process. I've got past podcast episodes on this of how you can kind of shrink your process and get it down. And I talk a lot of different aspects of personnel and other ones. Probably want to have a grading system. We had one for how I scouted and evaluated. I have implemented other ones in other external organizations that were more of a personal metric that focused on tangible traits, intangible traits, and variables, right? You want to have something that will allow you to make a decision based off of a true evaluation. Again, you still have to do the actual evaluation, but this is something that you want to have. You want to understand the population that exists within your organization. A little bit of a teaser: population goes beneath demographics. It goes beneath what you see, and we're talking about psychological profiles. I'm actually really looking forward to doing that episode, hopefully in the next week or two, because that's going to be a fun one, right? You want to be active in your sourcing, passive in your quote-unquote recruitment. What I mean by that, you want to take a pulse of anyone and anything that could be a potential fit. When I say everybody is for sale, okay, that means as organizations, you probably want to keep the burner on a little bit. See what's out there, because if somebody could leave at all times, you want to be able to hire at any moment. That is what NFL teams and most pro sports teams do exceptionally well. Somebody gets hurt, and because they've done the legwork, they know that they can call somebody and have them on a plane within a couple of hours and on the practice field the next day. That is that active part that actually factors in. You want to be able to actively know what's available. And then for organizations, they got to be held accountable, right? If I am somebody who is certainly in finance, but somebody who's the head of an organization, and we've got a turnover problem, I want to know who is making these decisions and why aren't they working out. And if that doesn't turn around, just like in any normal profession, if you are not performing, you got to go. And that echoes very true when it comes to personnel. So there's that. Now, under a different structure, and this is what I was arguing in my thesis, was talent acquisition splits off from HR and manages personnel exclusively. It's a little bit what they have, but this would be a true department whose only job it is to pay attention to the people. The discipline, the paperwork, the hiring, onboarding, all that can go through HR. You can keep that there, but this group in particular, they spend all day looking, sourcing, interviewing actively and passively people that are out there and keeping track of all of it. They are building the relationships. They're the face of your organization in that way. Why do I argue this? HR's got a lot of stuff, right? And it makes things a whole lot harder when HR is focusing on stuff and they have to just go do an interview. Now, for the teams that do have true talent acquisition teams, that is great. But a lot of times you've got generalists and people doing split duties, hiring for their organizations. And it's a lot. It's a lot to have all of that kind of built in. And then you're trying to do a proper evaluation, which they're not doing anyway. All right. A dedicated team makes it easier. And while it sounds expensive, I'm not just proposing a solution for you to spend money. It's probably going to save you a ton if you are saving on turnover. You don't have to invest the time, the resources, and the money to hire somebody. I hate hiring bonuses. You can probably get rid of those too. And you can spend the resources on finding the right people. So you have a better environment. Good people will be able to do their jobs better. And you are going to have something that is sustainable. That is the key of what we want here. Okay? Cool. It looks like we made it under 20. I'm going to hope that with editing, that is still the case. As always, if anything resonates, give a like, subscribe, engage, not just here, Instagram. I heard rumors of a TikTok, and go to the website. It's pretty cool. Can't save the world. Everything that is suggested here is just designed to not make it worse. On that, we will see you next time. Have a good one.